Testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. This is Radio Free Mormon on the air, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Tonight's episode, Mormon Temple Machinations. Yes, this story I originally broke on last Monday's Mormon newscast, and it's about some groundbreaking stuff that I found relating to the church's use of certain procedures, I call them machinations, in order to pave the way for building temples in places that the zoning would normally forbid it. And this was something that was really, really, I thought, very important. The views on it have been maybe 3,000 to 4,000, but I think it is important enough to replay it here on Radio Free Mormon, which has a bit bigger audience. I think this story should get traction, and hopefully you will share it with people that you know if you think it's worth it. Anyway, it's about 50 minutes long. It has my story. It has the different slides that I use. It also includes some commentary and thoughts by Bill Reel at the end, and also by Rebecca Biblioteca at the end. So here is this story that I'm calling for RFM podcast, Mormon Temple Machinations. See what you think. Thank you, Bill. Well, this is a story that was covered over at Mormonish by Rebecca, I think, last week. And what I did was I was looking at it today, getting some slides in order. I started doing a little bit more research, and I found out a number of things that I think are very interesting and which I think are being broadcast for the first time this evening. But in order to get there, so this will take probably about 30 minutes. So I hope that you will allow me that time. I guarantee you that by the time we get to the end of it, you're going to go, OMG, you have got to be freaking kidding me. Okay, that's my guarantee. We'll see if it upholds. All right, we start with the McKinney, Texas LDS Temple, which has not been built yet. This is a drawing. A site has been selected for it, and the site is, of course, in McKinney, Texas. Now, McKinney, Texas is a little town that's north of Dallas. It's part of what is sometimes called the Fort Worth, Dallas Metroplex. It's all a bunch of towns that have run together as they've grown. So Dallas, of course, has had its temple since 1985. Now they're getting another one, basically, is what this is. It's just a little bit north. So it features a 107-foot top steeple and 173-foot 8-inch top spire. That is the total height of the spire. It's one of these very large spires that are causing a lot of concern among neighborhoods where these temples are being planted. So let's go to the next one. Now, in the last few days, stake presidencies in this temple district for the McKinney Temple, I think, takes up 5 stakes. And stake presidencies have been sending out letters to their members, asking the members to write letters to the planning commissions who are in charge of approving or disapproving the temples for whatever plot of land they happen to be on, and whether they run into zoning ordinances, which might say, no, you can't have that temple here because it's too tall, especially with that spire, with that steeple you've got. But they are directing their members to write letters of support for the temple to the people who are going to be making the decisions. And what they're saying now, very interestingly, we've got 2 of these letters, is they want them to focus on the steeple of the temple as an integral part of the religious exercise and religious observance of the Latter-day Saints. Now, this is, of course, news to me and anybody else who's been a member of the church for over 5 minutes, because never since 1978, and in all my research that I've done before that time, have I ever heard any general authority or anybody anywhere in the LDS Church talk about the steeple of a temple as having anything to do with the religious practice of what goes on inside the temple. So let's go to this first letter to LDS members in the McKinney Temple District. This is in the Sherman, Texas stake, one of those 5 stakes I talked about. Sherman, Texas stake. The following message is being sent to members of the Sherman stake at the request of Elder Cannon, our Area 70. So this is GA directed. Brothers and sisters, we've been asked to help support the approval of the plan to build the McKinney, Texas Temple in Fairview, Texas by writing emails of support. We need the voting body to hear many voices of support with personal reasons why you want this temple here in our community. It doesn't have to be long. Brief is actually better. Be sincere and share from the heart, as long as you say the things that we want you to say. Okay, I added that part. We don't want these to seem scripted because then it would look like it was an orchestrated effort, which is what it is. But we want it to not look like what it is in order to fool the people that we're trying to get to vote for us. Okay, next one. This is the next part of that same email. Please email the planning manager. And I'm sure they give the email address there. It's been whited out. Subject line, resident in support for those who live in Fairview, or neighbor in support for those who live in a nearby town who are in the Temple District. In your email, you could answer a couple of the following questions. Not scripted, though. Why you're excited for and support a temple in Fairview and what it will mean to you personally and allow you to worship God/practice your faith. How houses of worship in a community benefit the whole community, and how the temple helps those who attend to be better people and improve their lives and therefore improve the community. How it will bless your family. While we want you to express your feelings in your own words, some key concepts would be helpful to the approval process. Well, what would those key concepts be, State President? A key message needs to be on the importance of the temple and how it allows you to worship as you choose. Okay, freedom of religion, religious observance, to practice your faith, religious observance, and that the building itself is a symbol of your faith. And then in parentheses, they helpfully including the steeple. Well, I'm sure this is a surprise to all the people who are getting it, but yes, I'm imagining they will do as directed and talk about how important that steeple is as a symbol of their faith. Now, if we go to the next one, which is going to be more explicit on the temple scene, the second letter to the LDS members in the McKinney Temple District, this from the Frisco, Texas stake. And here is their much lengthier email. Under the name, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it says Frisco, Texas stake, Frisco stake family. It was announced recently that the Frisco stake will be one of 5 stakes assigned to the new temple district for the McKinney, Texas temple when it is built. This is exciting news for our stake. We have been asked by Elder Jonathan Cannon, same GA, our local Area 70, and the Area Communications Committee to send the attached letter to members of our stake. So once again, this is coming from above. This isn't being generated or thought of in the stake level. It's coming from higher realms of glory. We would invite you to read the attached letter and follow the inspiration and direction you received by the power of the Holy Ghost. The temple is the house of the Lord, and he will guide us in our efforts to support his work here in our area. Thank you for your faith and support, Frisco Stake Presidency. And so now here apparently comes the letter that they've been asked to share, which presumably came from Elder Cannon. Going to the top of the middle paragraph, brothers and sisters, we've been asked to help support the approval of the plan to build the McKinney, Texas temple in Fairview, Texas by writing emails of support. We need the voting body to hear many voices of support with personal reasons why you want this temple here in our community. It doesn't have to be long. Brief is actually better. Be sincere and share from the heart. We don't want these scripted. That part sounds similar. We would invite you to email planning manager Israel Roberts in the following pattern. 1, subject line, resident in support. That's going to be the same as in the prior email. 2, in your email, you could answer a couple of the following questions. Why you're excited for and support a temple in Fairview and what it will mean to you. How houses of worship in a community benefit the whole community. And how the temple helps those who attend to be better people and improve their lives, etc. Now, at the top of the third paragraph is where things really get interesting. While we want you to express your feelings in your own words, some key concepts would be helpful to the approval process. A key message needs to be on the importance of the temple and how it allows you to worship as you choose to practice your faith, and that the building itself is a symbol of your faith, including the steeple, if you feel to be specific in that regard. Well, we'll be specific for you in the next paragraph. The height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. That's capital R, capital O, religious observance. The steeple is the temple's most distinctive architectural feature and serves no other purpose than to send a religious message. Steeples point toward heaven and serve the purpose of lifting our eyes and thoughts toward heaven. The steeple expresses a message of faith and devotion to God. By the way, these sentiments have never appeared to my knowledge in any conference talk or any church manual, ever. All right. If I'm wrong about that, please correct me. Please do not copy and paste these exact words and phrases in your messages. No, then it would look like we are orchestrating this. Please use your own as you prayerfully feel impressed to do so. At this time, the project will come for a vote by the Planning and Zoning Commission on Thursday, May 9th. We also would like to invite you to consider including the temple and the Fairview town leaders and residents in your fast this Sunday and on May 5th. So it looks like this was written the week before Fast Sunday in April. Thank you for your willingness to help prepare our community for another house of the Lord. I think that's a reference to the Dallas Temple from 1985. Tremendous for another house of the Lord, in other words. Tremendous blessings will come to us and our neighbors through our temple worship. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact Melissa McNeely at, and then whatever that was. Okay. So, including the steeple. By the way, I want to thank Rebecca for letting me pick and choose out of her slides that she used in her Mormonish presentation. It really helped. Not all of these are from there, and they're in a bit of a different order, but I couldn't have done it without you, Rebecca. You're the best. Including the steeple, that is a quotation from that prior letter. And this is what it says in highlight. The height of the steeple is part of our religious observance. The steeple is the temple's most distinctive architectural feature and serves no other purpose than to send a religious message. Steeples point toward heaven and serve a purpose of lifting our eyes and thoughts toward heaven. The steeple expresses a message of faith and devotion to God. Now, you may be wondering why it is, not only that I read it twice, but why it's in there at all, when we've never heard any message like that from any church leader in the entire history of the church, of which I'm aware. And the reason now has to do, first off, it's not true. All right. And when I joined the church in 1978, there were, I believe, 15 temples in the world. That's how much things have changed in the intervening years. But even then, out of the top 15, the first 15 temples, there were 3 that had no steeples. And those were Alberta or Cardston, the Hawaii Temple, and the Mesa, Arizona Temple. Those are all older temples, and none of them have steeples. Since that time, they have added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 temples that have no steeples. Paris, France, Meridian, Idaho, Tucson, Arizona, Hong Kong, China, Lima, Peru. Okay, so they have a bunch of temples with no, repeat, no steeples. So this is really, really a bad fact for the LDS Church as it tries to convince its members and through them, the Planning Commission, that this is something that is part of the religious observance of Mormons, is having a big old steeple on the temple. Moving on from that, what I did was I wanted to go and find out why it was that this was going on. Now, Rebecca had already figured out that this has to do with a law that was passed about 25 years ago. It's a federal law. It is called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. Yeah, that's a mouthful. So they abbreviate it to its initials, and it's like RLUIPA, which they call RLUIPA. Okay, it's the RLUIPA is the act. And instead of going to the entire act itself and reading through it, what I did was I located on the internet a Department of Justice synopsis of the act, which we have here. And it's an 11-page document. And the first 3 pages is the synopsis of the act. And you can see this was dated June 13, 2018, when the Department of Justice released this. And then it goes on to have Q&A about different elements of the act. And they have questions and answers on the land use provision of this act. So you see there's 1, 2, 3, that's this 4th page. And what I'm doing now is I have close-ups of this entire page, but in 2 parts so that it's easier to read. Questions and answers on the land use provisions of RLUIPA. Who is protected and what type of activities are covered? Let me just tell you right now, okay? So that you can understand it when we come to it. The whole idea of this act is to say that if you have a religious or educational, but we're focusing on the religious part, a religious building that serves some kind of religious purpose, then that trumps any zoning ordinances that may exist in the municipality or government district in which this religious building is being reared. It is given, religious buildings are now given protected status under this federal law, RLUIPA, which means that if you're going to, as a city, not allow a religious building to be constructed, even though it violates your local zoning ordinances, then you have to come up with an overwhelmingly good reason as to why it is that you're targeting these poor religious people and discriminating against them and not allowing them to build their building the way they want to build it, as long as it's for a religious observance or a religious exercise, right? And it is the church who's building this religious structure that gets to determine whether it is part of their religious exercise. Judges don't get into that. They basically, if the religion says this is part of our religious exercise or observant, then that's good enough for us, and then we're going to allow it to happen. Now, having said that, now let's go ahead and read this, and hopefully it'll make more sense with that little preface. Who is protected and what types of activities are covered? RLUIPA protects the religious exercise of persons defined to include religious assemblies and institutions in addition to individuals. So churches, LDS Church covered, check. Courts have applied RLUIPA, for example, in cases involving houses of worship. Hello, ding, 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 ding. Houses of worship. Individuals holding prayer meetings in their homes, religious schools, religious retreat centers, cemeteries, and faith-based social services provided by religious entities. Houses of worship, i.e., temples. Oh, yeah, this covers temples. What does religious exercise include? RLUIPA provides that religious exercise includes any exercise of religion, whether or not compelled by or central to a system of religious belief. It doesn't have to be central to it. It doesn't have to be compelled by it. It's just something that you do as part of your religion. Thus, a county or municipality cannot avoid the force of RLUIPA by asserting that a particular religious activity is something that a religious group merely wants to do rather than something that it must do. For example, a town could not claim that Sunday school classes are not religious exercise because they are not religious exercises, whatever, because they are less central to a church's beliefs or less compulsory than worship services. So you can see how this act gives broad authority to churches in designating what it is that they're building as having something to do with their religious exercise. RLUIPA also specifies that the use, building, or conversion of real property, the use, building, or conversion of real property for the purpose of religious exercise shall be considered to be religious exercise. So building on real estate, yeah, religious exercise. This provision makes clear that religious exercise under RLUIPA includes construction or expansion. Construction or expansion of places of worship, like temples, and other properties used for religious exercise. So obviously this applies to a lot of different things, but temples is squarely under what it addresses and protects. Courts have held that religious exercise covers a wide range of activities, including operation of various faith-based social services, facilities, accessories such as fellowship halls, parish halls, and similar buildings or rooms used for meetings, religious education, and similar functions. Operation of a religious retreat center in a house, religious gatherings at homes, and construction or expansion of religiously affiliated schools, even where the facilities would be used for both secular and religious educational activities. Who is bound by RLUIPA's requirements? In other words, who has to follow this federal law? Basically, everybody. RLUIPA applies to states, including state departments and agencies, and their subdivisions, such as counties, municipalities, villages, towns, cities, city councils, planning boards, zoning boards, and zoning appeals boards. So who does it apply to? It applies to you. If you are any kind of government agency or subdivision in the United States, yeah, this applies to you, pal. So you better sit up and pay attention and allow these things to go forward, even if they violate your local zoning rules. All right. Now, I wanted to go back to that highlighted part from the email, that second email we read, the letter, right? Now, let's read it again and see if this makes more sense to you, why it is they're wanting all the members to include this in their letters to the city council and the planning commissions in McKinney, Texas. The height of the steeple is part of our religious observance, capital R, capital O. They are forcing the language to fit within what is protected by the RLUIPA federal statute. The steeple is the temple's most distinctive architectural feature and serves no other purpose than to send a religious message. Can you see how they're crafting this language to fit what RLUIPA protects? Steeples point toward heaven and serve a purpose of lifting our eyes and thoughts toward heaven. The steeple expresses a message of faith and devotion to God. See how religiously observant the use of steeples in temples is? It's obviously protected by RLUIPA. All right? That's why that's there. Now, question. Why didn't the church lawyers in McKinney, Texas simply cite to the 2000 federal law and claim victory, or do so in the future and come in and say, look, our LUPA says that, and by the way, I want to say this. I don't know right now whether that very large 170 some odd foot steeple that's planned for the McKinney, Texas temple violates any zoning ordinances in the place where it has been selected and the property purchased for it to be built. Do you know the answer to that, Rebecca?
Oh, yes, it absolutely does violate. Yes, there's a lot of different pieces in there, and they're all that. Yes, it's a 35-foot roof line, and then anything above that, there's going to have to be some kind of special condition, which is why we're talking about this. But yes, it does.
I figured there would be, because the church is having this habit, it seems, of selecting temple sites in residential neighborhoods instead of in places where they would fit into the zoning that already exists. They're trying to put it in places where zoning is for residential, and these steeples end up over and over again. We've seen this in other places, violating the zoning ordinances that are in effect for that zone where they're putting the temple. All right, thank you for answering that question, Rebecca. I figured that was the answer, but I also figured you would know. The answer is, so why don't the church lawyers in McKinney, Texas just go in, cite to RLUIPA in their briefing and say, we win, King's X. Hey, we can do this. And I think the answer is because there is nothing the lawyers can cite to in the records of the church that would support their claim, which they have to make as part of this motion, that temple steeple height is part of Mormon religious exercise, because there isn't anything there. If they could quote to it, so from an address by Gordon B. Hinckley back in the 1990s, where he talks about how important, the temple spire height is to our religious exercise, boom, they would have this, but they don't, because it's a fiction. All right. It is a fiction that they are now trying to put across to the city council members and the planning commission in McKinney, Texas, and they're trying to put it across through their members. Therefore, they are having the church and its lawyers, therefore, they are having the members, because they can't do it themselves because there's no record. They are having the members mention it in letters to the McKinney Planning Commission and City Council as if temple steeple height is something that members of the church already understand as being part of their religious observance, capital R, capital O. Now, these are my thoughts, my conclusions right now, based upon the research that I've done actually this morning. And so I will bracket them with the fact that, yeah, I can't say this is hard and fast, absolutely what happened, but it sure looks like it makes sense with the facts. Now, this is a story that has to do not with the McKinney, Texas temple, but with the Boston, Massachusetts temple. From many years ago, it was actually the 100th temple that was dedicated, number 100. And this says, not long after construction, this will tie in, believe me, big time. Just bear with me. Not long after construction of the Boston, Massachusetts temple began, a few neighbors became alarmed by its size and filed suit with the intention to have the temple torn down. The plaintiffs argued that the state's Dover Amendment, that'll be important. It's a law in the state of Massachusetts that has effect in the state of Massachusetts, which basically says something similar to what RLUIPA ends up saying, which is if you are building something as a religious organization and it's part of your religious observance, then you kind of get a King's X on this, and you're going to be able to build it regardless of whether it violates the local zoning, unless the government entity in which the temple is being built can show overwhelmingly that they need to violate or they need to not allow it, and that it serves this huge government purpose. It's really important, and this government purpose can be achieved in no other way than by infringing on the structure of this religious organization. So that's why it's so powerful. But this is the Dover Amendment. It is in Massachusetts. It is a Massachusetts state law and therefore applies only in Massachusetts. Okay. RLUIPA is a federal law which applies in all the states. All right. Going on with this article, the plaintiffs argued, these are the neighbors who don't want the temple there. The plaintiffs argued that the state's Dover Amendment, which exempts religious buildings from local zoning, violated the separation of church and state. So they're saying that the amendment itself is unconstitutional. The federal judge disagreed and ruled in favor of the church. Salt Lake Organizing Committee President Mitt Romney escorted U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy through the Boston, Massachusetts temple during the VIP open house. That's the one I wasn't invited to. Were you invited to that one, Bill? The VIP open house?
I was not
Rebecca?
allowed to go to that. No.
Oh no, I'm banned from things. Remember, like Book of Mormon Central dinners? Yeah, I never get invited. I get banned.
Okay, well then I don't feel so bad.
No.
But Mitt Romney was there to escort Ted Kennedy through the VIP open house to the Boston, Massachusetts temple. Just 6 years earlier, Romney had challenged Kennedy for his veteran seat in the Senate in a heated race many considered too close for comfort. The Boston, Massachusetts temple was dedicated without a steeple. The Boston, Massachusetts temple was dedicated without a steeple due to a lawsuit contesting the proposed height of the steeple. My, how history repeats itself. The church eventually won the case on appeal, and the 139-foot steeple was added about a year after the dedication. Elder Lawrence C. Dunn, the first president of the Boston, Massachusetts temple, passed away just hours after the court's ruling that the steeple could be added, so at least he died happy. All right. Now, that made me wonder, when the heck was the Boston, Massachusetts temple dedicated? Because I don't have all these faxes rolling around in my head, but fortunately, there's a thing called the internet. So I went on this website dealing with the Boston, Massachusetts temple, and here's what it says. The announcement was made 30 December 1995. The groundbreaking and site dedication was 1997, and the public open house was from 29 August to 23 September of 2000. So the construction went into 2000, and then it was dedicated without the steeple, which would be added a year later. So right now, just remember 2000. If you can remember September 2000, so much the better. That's when it was dedicated, the Boston, Massachusetts temple. If we go back to this Department of Justice synopsis of the RLUIPA statute, I just want to point out a couple things here, okay? In the first paragraph, Congress passed RLUIPA unanimously in what year? 2000. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. President Clinton signed it into law on September 22nd, 2000, which ironically happened to be the next to last day of the open house for the Boston temple, because it went through September 23rd, 2000, remember? So right here, yeah, right there. 29 August to 23rd September 2000. These are happening at the same time. And who was it who sponsored this bill? Let's look at the third paragraph. As RLUIPA's Senate sponsors, Senator Hatch and the late Senator Kennedy said in their joint statement, I don't care what they say in their joint statement for purposes of this. What you need to know is that Senator Orrin Hatch, along with his good buddy, Ted Kennedy, and I'm not saying that facetiously, they were famously like the odd couple, but very different viewpoints politically, but they seem to enjoy each other's company. So it's not surprising they did this together. But what we have to understand is that in the year 2000, Orrin Hatch, along with Ted Kennedy, I'm suspecting this was led by Orrin Hatch, and Ted Kennedy threw in for his friend to make it bipartisan. It passed unanimously because of that. Comes up with this RLUIPA statute, which they put through Congress, and it gets passed and made law in the year 2000. Okay, next part. Now, I'm still focusing on Orrin Hatch. Orrin Hatch is a senator from Utah, United States senator from Utah, who served for a long period of time, distinguished career. But there's another United States senator, by the way, in case anybody doesn't know, Orrin Hatch, yeah, he was a Mormon, okay? Famously, he was a Mormon, and he was a faithful, observant Mormon, unlike Harry Reid. Harry Reid was much more liberal, and Orrin Hatch was much more conservative and much more likely to do what it was that the church wanted him to do. There's another senator, a United States senator who served also at this time. His name is Gordon Smith, and he was a United States senator from the state of Oregon. And sometime after he had stopped serving as a senator, and I'm not exactly sure when this happens. Okay, it's sometime after the Iraqi war started. But senator or former senator Gordon Smith, whose face is right up here. He presents to the Council of the 12 Apostles in Salt Lake City. And I have 3 clips from this. By the way, I have to give a shout out to Mormon Leaks, who obtained this in some way and then released it. It's available on YouTube because of their efforts. But this is remarkable because what we find out from this is that this U.S. Senator, Gordon Smith from Oregon, considers it his highest duty as a senator to promote the interests of the LDS Church. And the first clip is of somebody that we don't see a lot of in recent weeks, Elder Ballard, since he's passed away now. But Elder Ballard gets up and he introduces not Senator Gordon Smith, but another guy whose first name is Ralph. And Ralph has the position of being the liaison between Salt Lake City and the church leaders and Gordon Smith's office. He's the one who carries the messages back and forth. So here is in the first clip, Elder Ballard introducing Ralph the liaison. Then the second clip is Ralph the liaison talking about his experience with Gordon Smith and Gordon Smith's office. And the last clip, and these are all just a couple minutes long, if that much, is Gordon Smith himself talking about how it is his most important duty as a senator to promote the interests of the church. Do we have the first clip there, Bill?
Yep. So here we go.
Brethren, we're honored to have with us today Senator Gordon Smith and Ralph Harding. These two brethren have performed marvelous work for public affairs and for the church in general. And it's a privilege to have them here. And we've asked Ralph if he would introduce our wonderful senator. So pleased to have you with us. And now I'll turn it over to you two brethren. Let them come up. Then Ralph, if you'd introduce the senator, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, so that's
Dear
where
brethren, I have known.
So there.
Oh, so sorry. Sorry, Arfim. It said to go to timestamp 50 seconds.
Oh, well, go ahead. I'm so sorry. Go ahead. I interrupted my own timestamp.
That's okay.
Senator Gordon Harold Smith, now a youthful 56 years of age, since he was a boy of 2, when his parents, Mylan D. and Jeff.
So that was
it.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. By the way, it did have a card on the front. This is alleged to have happened on February 18th, 2009 is when this took place. Okay. So that's the date on this. So we've got Elder Ballard introducing Ralph, who's the liaison. The second clip is now Ralph, the liaison, going to be talking about his experience dealing with Gordon Smith's office. And the word and expression church broke enters the lexicon.
In the Senate. Gordon became a skilled legislator and of greatest importance to this council today and in this sanctuary. I stand as a witness of his tireless advocacy for the vital interest of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For in my experience, he always stood ready first and foremost as a high priest and as a covenant member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint, and receptive and able and willing to serve its most vital interest in Washington and, in fact, internationally. Though I can't remember any Latter-day Saints that were permanent members of his staff, it was fair to say that his staff in the Senate was church broke. In fact, not many months ago, his legislative director called me on the phone and he said, "Ralph, you haven't called us for 6 weeks. What are we supposed to be doing?"
Okay, so the next clip, by the way, for any of you who are not familiar with the United States system of government, a senator is a representative from the state that they are elected in, and they're supposed to represent the interests of the citizens of the state that they're elected in, which in his case is Oregon. His job is not, repeat, not to represent the interests of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or any other church as far as that goes. His job is just to represent the interests of the people who elected this guy. But he gets elected. He's a faithful Mormon. And of course, as faithful Mormons will do, especially if they're church broke, really the representation of the people who elected him is secondary. And it's the church, the church, the church. That's who he's going to put on the front burner. That's the top shelf. That's who he's going to make a priority of representing their interests. And the liaison said that as well, incredibly saying that sometimes he would get calls from people in his staff saying, we haven't heard from you, i.e. we haven't heard from the liaison with the church in Salt Lake. We haven't heard from the church in Salt Lake in 6 weeks. What are we supposed to do? You got to tell us, man. We're here for you. Just give us the marching orders and we'll take care of business here in Washington, D.C. Now there's a brief clip here of a rather long address by Gordon Smith himself, in which he expresses the same kind of sentiments. This is just a minute or two at the most.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for your way too generous introduction. Brethren, I'm honored to be in your presence. My parents, Mylon Smith and Jessica Udall, raised me with a fundamental principle, and that is to follow the brethren. And so while I'm somewhat accustomed to speaking with United States senators and even presidents of the United States, I stand humbly before you because I know who you are, and I know my covenants, and I know the role that you play in this world in building the kingdom of God in Caesar's world. That's the title that I used as an address to your Public Affairs Committee the other day.
Yes, building the kingdom of God in Caesar's world. That's his catchphrase and the title of an address he gave just the other day. And he's going to quote a little bit of it. And he goes on and on for quite a bit and then answers some questions from the apostles. Okay, he's totally on board. This is Senator Gordon Smith from Oregon, who is church broke and will do whatever it is that the church tells him to do. So now we go to the next slide, Mr. Reel, and we ask the question, are we to believe that Senator Orrin Hatch was any less church broke and any less willing to do the bidding of church leaders than Senator Gordon Smith? That's my question. If that were Harry Reid up there, the answer might be different, but I think it's pretty clear what the answer is when you put in Senator Orrin Hatch. Of course, he is just as church broke and is willing to do whatever the church tells him to do, which may indeed lead into why it was that he was a sponsor of this RLUIPA federal act in the year 2000. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I asked the question, is it possible that the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, RLUIPA, of 2000 might just as well have been called the LDS Boston Temple Steeple Waiver Act? Because I've got a feeling that it just may be that in spite of the language of the act and how it applies to all sorts of different religions, which it must in order to pass constitutional muster itself, that the specific reason that this was sponsored by Senator Orrin Hatch was in response to a direction that he got from Salt Lake City that had to do with paving the way for the Boston Temple against public discontent and public action against it, and also its steeple. So let me flesh that out just a little bit. This is the heading of the case that went up to the Massachusetts Supreme Court, not the U.S. Supreme Court. I make that distinction because something will go up to the U.S. Supreme Court here in a little bit. Not this case, but it's Arlene Martin and others versus the corporation of the presiding bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Is 434 Mass 141. That's the title. You can find it in the volume and page. And it was, I think, argued January 12, 2001, but the ruling was issued May 16th, 2001 in Middlesex County, and it talks about those who were present. Those are the justices. I read the article. I read this opinion. Critically, this opinion does not mention RLUIPA. Now, it doesn't mention RLUIPA because what it bases its decision on, which is in favor of the church. And that's why the church gets to build its steeple, though it's a year after the building itself was finished and dedicated without the steeple. This is why they get to build the steeple, is because of this opinion. What they ended up doing, let me go ahead and read this. The ruling granted the church's claim to have a temple that violated the zoning ordinances under the Dover Amendment. Once again, that's the Massachusetts law. In Massachusetts, which, similar to the federal law passed in the year 2000, made a religious building essentially exempt from zoning laws if the structure involved a religious purpose. Hence, the 2000 RLUIPA, the federal law, essentially made the Massachusetts Dover Amendment into federal law applicable to all states, including Massachusetts, but not just Massachusetts. And I hope that this is clear enough, because what follows, I think, is very interesting. This is the Dover Amendment, which I obtained from Wikipedia. The Dover Amendment is the common name for Massachusetts general law, and I put in there passed in 1950 because I saw somewhere else when I was doing my research, and I believe it's correct that the Dover Amendment itself is as old as 1950. This law exempts agricultural, religious, and educational uses from certain zoning restrictions by limiting what zoning requirements apply to land and structures that hold these uses. The Dover Amendment makes it easier for these uses to build structures to serve their needs. The Dover Amendment allows many developers to build facilities that are substantially larger than zoning laws would ordinarily allow, or which would be considered inappropriate by some for the neighborhood. In other words, the non-Mormon neighbors who don't want this temple going up in their neighborhood with a spire that goes halfway to the sky and shines all night long. Okay, that's the Dover Amendment in a nutshell. And you can see how similar it is to those provisions of the RLUIPA statute that we went over earlier. Question I ask, why pass then? Why pass a federal law in the year 2000, the RLUIPA statute, when the Dover Amendment would ultimately prevail in the Boston Temple steeple case? You don't need this federal law when you've got a law in Massachusetts that does the same thing, and which indeed ends up being the law that the Massachusetts Supreme Court uses in order to uphold the violation of the zoning by the church in its steeple. The answer, which came to me this afternoon, is because the Dover Amendment itself was at the same time being challenged as to its constitutionality, which the U.S. Supreme Court would not rule on until January of 2001, when the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the Dover Amendment in a completely separate case. So here's the issue. If the church goes forward based upon the Dover Amendment exclusively, which does apply in Boston because it's a Massachusetts statute, and if they put all their eggs in that basket, and then in the separate case, which is challenging the constitutionality of the Dover Amendment, if the U.S. Supreme Court says, sorry, the Dover Amendment is unconstitutional, we're striking it down, now the church is screwed in Massachusetts because it doesn't have any law to rely on in order to have its temple built in violation of the local zoning ordinances. Note, if the Massachusetts Supreme Court had not ruled for the church and its temple steeple based on the state's Dover Amendment, it would have been compelled to reach the same conclusion based on the 2000 federal law sponsored by Senators Orrin Hatch and Teddy Kennedy. So this is a plan B. If indeed the Dover Amendment, and everybody knew it was being challenged because, you know, it takes years for a challenge to a statute to win its way up to the United States Supreme Court. So they know it's being challenged and it's on its way to the Supreme Court. If it had been struck down, then the backup plan is to have Orrin Hatch and Teddy Kennedy propose and sponsor federal legislation, which would do the same thing in Massachusetts as well as in all the other states of the Union. It would give that same kind of protection to any kind of religious building, as long as it is being used for something that has to do with religious observance or religious exercise. As it turned out, they didn't need to have that because the Dover Amendment was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court, and therefore this RLUIPA statute doesn't appear in the Massachusetts Supreme Court opinion ruling in favor of the church and the church temple steeple. All right, now All of this gets summarized here in an article, which is in the archives of the Church News from May 19th, 2001. This is right after the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled in favor of the church. And if you look in the background there, they have a picture of the Boston Temple without the steeple. That's what it looked like. It was completely done, except for the steeple, which had to wait for a year in order for it to be permitted to be added on because of this case in Massachusetts. So, Church News Archives, 19 May 2001, Boston, Mass. A unanimous ruling by the Massachusetts Supreme Court, May 16th, ended a lengthy debate about the height of the Boston Temple and paves the way for the church to complete construction of a steeple. Quote, the church applauds the decision of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, said Dale Bills, church spokesman. The court's decision truly reflects the religious freedom that has been long cherished in New England, in clearing the way for the church to mount a single spire on the building. The court has ratified and affirmed the earlier judgments of those who are best able to make such decisions on behalf of the community. Yeah, you always say nice things about the courts when they rule in your favor. They're really smart when they rule for you. When they rule against you, they're dumb as bricks. The article goes on. The dispute hinged on whether the steeple was critical to the religious purposes of the temple. Remember those emails that are going out now, even as we speak? The religious purposes, the steeple. This is 2001, mind you. A local governing board in Belmont, Mass., where the temple is located, originally approved the steeple, stating that the state's Dover Amendment granted religious edifices exemption from local zoning restrictions. And I highlighted this one in red, because this is where I found out about it. The U.S. Supreme Court also upheld the Dover Amendment in January of 2001 by saying that it did not grant unconstitutional advantages to religious groups. But several vocal opponents of the temple who lived nearby in an upscale neighborhood, which I guess is where they decided to plant the temple, contended that the steeple was not necessary for worship and that it should not be allowed to exceed zoning laws. Their argument prevailed with a trial court judge last year who said the steeple was not a necessary element of the Mormon religion. But in its May 16th ruling, the state's highest court unanimously disagreed. Writing for the court, Chief Justice Margaret Marshall rejected the decision of the trial court in a 17-page opinion, saying that, quote, it is not for judges to determine whether the inclusion of a particular architectural feature is necessary for a particular religion. See, they get to kind of decide that themselves. And the final page, the steeple we really believe, oh, that's a giveaway. See the really part? This is from the a member of the stake presidency in Boston. Notice what he's saying. Remember this, 2001. The steeple, we really believe, is an integral part of the symbolism of the building. This has been going on a while, hasn't it? Said Grant Bennett, a member of a stake presidency in Boston. By the way, anytime somebody puts really in front of believe, it's usually an indication that they're lying. I'm just saying. The steeple, we really believe. If they really believed it, you'd have to put really in front of it. And that's the quote from Grant Bennett, a member of stake presidency in Boston, quoted by Associated Press as he responded to inquiries from the local media. The ruling effectively ends the case. Brother Bennett said, construction of the steeple will begin soon and should be completed this summer. The church plans to construct the steeple with minimal impact on the neighborhood. The stately 70,000 square foot Boston Temple was dedicated without a steeple on October 1, 2000 by President Gordon B. Hinckley. And that steeple was built after this decision and put back on top there the following year so that it could look, instead of like this, like this. And isn't that much more satisfying if you're a neighbor in this upscale community who is fighting against this temple and its steeple every step of the way? Rebecca, what do you think? I know you've been following this a long time, and I know we had a discussion this morning after I wanted to share with you what I was finding out, and I was really excited about it.
That's true. RFM and I and my co-host Landon kind of arrived at the same conclusion almost at the same time. So he was excited to tell me. I was yelling, "Don't scoop me." That's what happens behind the scenes. But I have to say, I have not seen that Smith video for a while. And I just, oh my goodness, I forgot how upsetting that is. And I just want to mention before I make some comments about RLUIPA is that some of the clips that you didn't see is, when he was here, I'll even read this. I found a quote. While Smith eventually became an opponent of the war in Iraq, because remember, this is back in the early 2000s, Smith said that he initially voted for it because I felt the Lord's hand, and I did not think missionaries, LDS missionaries, would ever be allowed in the Arab states unless the rule of law took hold there. So if you ever question that there is influence from the LDS Church in the federal government, do not question this. You can watch videos like this. He also said that his temple recommend was more important to him than his election certificate. So just a little side note, but if you ever question the influence, which speaks exactly to RLUIPA, what we're talking about. And I will say the first time that I ever sort of became aware of this, so my co-host Landon and I on Mormonish have been sort of temple watchers for over a year now. One of our viewers about a year ago, maybe even a year and a half, it's been a long time, reached out to us from Cody, Wyoming, and said, there's something going on here with the LDS Church and some residents in a temple. And we thought, what's this? Let's find out more. So we started working with the residents in Cody, and maybe some of you have seen our different podcasts that we've done over the last while about this. But the first inkling that I had of this RLUIPA is one of these residents who was fighting to have the temple relocated. Again, we need to say it's not, don't build a temple at all. It's just follow the laws of the land. One of the women asked me, are there any temples with domes? And I thought, that's a very interesting question. Why would you want to know if there were any temples with domes? And then she explained to me that they were, threatening the city council and the town to sue using this RLUIPA, saying that the steeple that they wanted to put on the building there in Cody was exactly what they're saying here, an integral part of their religious worship. So of course, my co-host Landon and I, we gave them a whole list of temples that have domes, and they were able to kind of do a little workaround with that. And their attorney was very smart and was able to do some things to maneuver there. But I feel now, interestingly, flash forward, we started working with Heber, sort of the same kind of thing. Now here we're working with the residents in McKinney and also Lone Mountain. And here in McKinney, to see those letters and to see them try to backdate this idea that the height of the temple has always been part of our religion, we know exactly what they're trying to do. I think they were tipped off in Cody, and now they're like, that's not going to happen to us again. We're going to have something to point to show, just like RFM said, that it is indeed a central tenet of our religion. So it's just been fascinating to me to see it play out in real time. And I'm very glad that people like RFM, people like it was very funny when my co-host Landon realized it was Ornat. She was like yelling, you'll never believe who it is. And I think that's how you felt today too, that there were three senators that were Mormons that had sponsored this. So again, the message is, if you don't believe there's influence in the federal government from the very powerful Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, these are perfect examples of it. And thank you for all that explanation and due diligence, RFM, because it's very complex, but it's important to understand, especially for those residents in Lone Mountain and Heber and Cody and McKinney, who we salute you and what you're doing. I have to say, I know a lot of you are watching tonight, and we absolutely admire you. You are amazing people.
Yes, and hopefully some of this research may be of some benefit in your efforts to have the LDS Church follow the law and abide by the zoning ordinances in your community, and not use a fictionalized defense in order to subvert those zoning requirements and build the temple anyway.
Yeah. A couple thoughts. So one, as you pointed out, it's a strange coincidence that at the exact same time they're doing the temple open house of a temple that they're not allowed to put the steeple on, there are laws being passed at the federal level by Orrin Hatch, a faithful Latter-day Saint who's always indicated by his outward behavior that he is loyal to the church and to the brethren. That's just, it seems like almost too strange of a coincidence to be a coincidence. Number two, folks in the chat, because we have folks watching who are not members of the church but are following this story closely, there were 3 or 4 people who asked what church broke means. The easiest way for me to relate it would be if you were to capture a wild stallion horse, who that horse wants to do whatever the hell it wants to do because it isn't broken. When you break a horse, you essentially break its will so that it does what you want it to do. And when people in the church refer to being church broke, specifically politicians, what they are doing is showing their hand and letting the church know, I will do what you tell me to do. I'm church broke. So there's that. Next, in the original letter, they said to talk about the temple and how important it is, and that some of you should mention the steeple. It would have seemed too orchestrated to have everybody mention the steeple, and they know that. So they just wanted a certain percentage of people to mention the steeple. And when leaders tell Mormons to do something, good Mormons will do it. And so they knew that a certain number of those letters would come in mentioning the steeple. And then the last thing I will say, as a member, I'm not anymore, but as at one time a member of the church, all in, temple recommend holding, faithful, all believing Latter-day Saint, if the church had not told me to mention the steeple and had given me the meaning, I would have never, ever, ever, and nor would anyone else. You could have surveyed 1,000 Mormons, and if none of them were told to mention the steeple, none of them would have, because the steeple is simply not part of any piece of Mormon theology in my entire time in the church. And I've read practically every book on Mormon theology coming out from the church. It doesn't exist as far as I know.
Great comments. Thank you so much for those, Rebecca and Bill. So that completes this story. So that is the Mormon Temple Machinations, a story that I broke on Mormon Newscast last Monday. I hope that you think it's as interesting as I do. I'm very, very shocked but not surprised at what it is the church seems to be doing in trying to go around every corner, every edge, over every homeowners association. It's like Elder Holland said about the Book of Mormon. If you're going to leave the church, you have to crawl around or under over the Book of Mormon. Well, to build the temple, they have to either crawl around or under or smash every homeowners association and all the zoning ordinances in order to build their temples. So that is about all for tonight. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for all of you who donate to the show. Your contributions do keep Radio Free Mormon broadcasting behind enemy lines. Thanks again, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon signing off the air.